When grief comes to school, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 4, who comforteth us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted by God. The words children and death seem to contradict one another. However, death and the resulting grief is a reality of life faced by everyone regardless of age. Grief could come to your school via any number of avenues. Most of the information I will share with you in this workshop this afternoon is a result of when I pastored in Maryland. I was also a hospice chaplain. And in the training, if you will, to become a hospice chaplain, I learned something that amazed me when I learned it and amazes me still today, that the two professions that deal most extensively and most often with dying, death, and grief, medical doctors and pastors, both professions virtually never receive any formal training in their education in helping people deal with this topic. It's still rarely taught, anything on this topic, taught in medical schools, and you're starting to see it some in Bible colleges and seminaries, but not as much as you would think, given the professions. The focus in this workshop is obviously going to be on grieving children, helping grieving children, either an individual child or a group. Now, preparing for any workshop, I want you to know that I do quite a bit of research. I do read after some very deep and profound thinkers. In this workshop, preparing for this workshop, I read some works by A.A. Milne, if you're familiar with A.A. Milne. Anybody know who A.A. Milne was? No, yes, sir. Wrote Winnie the Pooh, yes. Very deep and profound. One of the stories, you may remember it, Winnie the Pooh went to visit his friend Rabbit in Rabbit's Hole. And they had a wonderful time together. Winnie the Pooh especially enjoyed eating milk and honey with Rabbit. But when it came time for Winnie the Pooh to leave, he couldn't fit through Rabbit's hole anymore. Actually, he got stuck halfway in and halfway out. And Rabbit tried to push him out from the inside. That didn't work. So he went outside and tried to pull him out from the outside. That didn't work. All Winnie the Pooh could do was sigh. So they went and got Christopher Robin, see if he could come help, and he couldn't come help, or he couldn't help either. So Winnie the Pooh said to Christopher Robin, "Then would you read a sustaining book that would help and comfort a wedged bear in great tightness?" A child's grief is a great tightness. They feel wedged. They can't go back, and they're afraid to go forward. But people like you, on your church staffs and your school staffs, you can be there for a grieving child or grieving children, just like Christopher Robin was there for Winnie the Pooh. A lot of what we're going to say in this workshop has application to any grieving person, and I'll mention some of those. But we need to realize, as we talk about this workshop, that children and adolescents grieve differently than adults. Yet caring adults like you can help a young person immeasurably when they experience a loss. As a beginning, we need to look at some basic concepts of grief. A very simple, workable definition of grief is that grief is a normal, internalized reaction to the loss of a person, thing, or idea. Now again, we're dealing with the grieving child here who has lost someone close to them. In this workshop, we're going to be very specific or very narrow. We're going to be talking about a child who's lost a sibling, a parent, or a grandparent. Now, I'm not going to address these other topics, but I want to make you aware that the principles that we're going to talk about in helping a grieving child who has lost a person close to them, the principles would apply to a child in a family that their parents have divorced, or the child has been abandoned, either literally abandoned by their parents or abandoned in the foster care system, because for that child or those children, their parents are every bit as much gone, in many cases, as if they had physically died. So the emotions that a child would experience would be very similar to what we're talking about, and you can use some of the principles we're going to be talking about to help a child in those circumstances. And a child who has experienced abuse, specifically, not limited to, but specifically, physical and sexual child abuse. A child that experiences those will grieve because they're grieving the loss of their childhood. Their childhood was taken away from them. So the things we're going to talk about will have other applications, but we're going to talk about a child who's lost a sibling, parent, or grandparent. We need to realize that each person grieves in their own way. There is no right, proper, or correct way to grieve. The way we grieve is as individual and as different as we are. We need to realize that a grieving person does not suddenly get over it. A matter of fact, they never get over it. They go on, but they never get over it. In generations past, I think it was 30 days was an official period of mourning, and all the family wore black clothes the whole time. But then after the end of the 30 days, everything was supposed to go back to normal. Well, a grieving person doesn't just suddenly get over it. In our circles where churches and Christian schools, if a family in the church or school experiences a loss, we gather around. Friends and relatives from out of town will come and help, and we'll run errands, we'll babysit, we'll send food to the home. And there's often lots of people in the home that has experienced the loss, usually up through maybe a day or two after the funeral. And then all the other people, there's out-of-town guests, there's out-of-town families, we in our churches and our schools, we all go back to normal. And that's a very difficult time for a grieving person often, is because where'd everybody go? You know, there's a whole house full of people all around, and then they're gone. Because the rest of us go back to normal. The grieving person doesn't have a normal. They have a new normal. And they have to adjust and figure out what that new normal is. So they don't suddenly get over it. Hopefully they'll go on. And that we need to realize that grief is a gradual process of healing. It's a process that takes time. Let me put all three of these up. It's a process or a journey that takes time. Some people are able to work through the mourning process more quickly than others. Others take longer. That's fine. There's no right or proper or accepted way to do it. And grief is very complex. It's as complex as we are as individuals. But the thing we need to remember is that grief needs expression. Now, a saying, if I want to use that phrase, a saying that we often hear when we're talking about grieving is this: one needs to go through it to get through it. One needs to go through it to get through it. A mourning person has to work through the process of grieving in order to get through it. But there are often individuals whose circumstances are such that they won't or don't or can't allow themselves to grieve. And unexpressed grief for an adult and for a child can have serious spiritual, emotional, even physical consequences over a period of time. Feelings and fears are not usually resolved unless they are addressed and then channeled in healthy directions. I mentioned in the workshop right after lunch that I'm the youngest in my family. The brother closest to me in age is 10 years older than I am. A year ago, this past May, he lost his oldest daughter. She was 37, 38, I believe. She'd had some health issues, but her heart began to fail. Long story short, she was eligible for a heart transplant. My brother called me. He's retired Navy, so he lives in Northern Virginia, but the operation was done at Bethesda Naval Hospital outside Washington, D.C. He called me one morning all excited. I was at work, and he said that they'd found a perfect match, healthy heart, and his daughter, they were going to transplant the heart. They flew it, I don't know where it came from, but they flew it in. And then it seemed like just not very long at all. A few hours later, I was still at work. My brother called me and said the doctors had told him they'd never had this happen before. Healthy heart, perfect match. They transplanted the heart, but then they couldn't get it to start beating again. They did all the things that they would normally do, the electric things and whatever, but nothing they could do would get the heart to start beating again. They told my brother that they could keep his daughter alive on a heart-lung machine for a period of time, but obviously not long enough to go through the whole transplant list and things again. So my brother had to make the decision to take his daughter off life support. I'll tell you that for this purpose. This is the point I want to make. That brother, my brother Alvin, is a world-class stuffer. He does not express, I rarely He's 10 years older than I am, so he's 71. Rarely have I ever seen him express any emotion whatsoever. At this time, when his daughter died, when both of our parents died, when our father died, I was 13, so he was 23. When our mother died, quite a few years after that, I've never seen him express any emotion. He is not allowing himself to go through the grieving process. And he won't be able to go through it. He won't be able to get through it till he goes through it. And then, ironically enough, my niece had a son, Cody, my great-nephew, who not only looks surprisingly like his grandfather physically, but he's also a stuffer. So my wife and I pray for my brother and my great-nephew every day that they will allow themselves to grieve, because thus far, nearly 18 months after the fact, they haven't. One needs to go through it in order to get through it. If we're going to help a grieving child, we need to understand how children view death. Now, in this workshop, we're going to look kind of narrower focus. Children you would have encounters with in your learning center. We're going to talk about school-age children, 6 to 12 years of age about, and then adolescents or teenagers, 13 to 18 years of age. Because children are always developing, their understanding of and reaction to death are always changing. To help a child cope with grief, it's important to understand how children, 6 to 12, and teens, 13 to 18, view death in general. It varies by age and often changes as the child develops emotionally and socially. But we need to keep in mind that when you're talking about anything divided by age for children, children do not move abruptly from one stage of development to the next. So the stages or the features from one stage may overlap. Just because a child goes from 12 to 13 doesn't mean they're automatically going to start manifesting the characteristics for the older group. For school-age children, 6 to 12 years of age, they understand at this age that death is final. By the age of 10, most of them understand that death happens to everyone and that death cannot be avoided. They understand that every person alive on the face of this planet is going to someday die. Children this age are often very interested in the specific details of death and what happens to the body after the person dies. They will ask lots of questions. We'll talk about that in a moment, about the specific details. Children this age will experience a wide range of emotions, including guilt, anger, shame, anxiety, sadness, and they will begin to worry about their own death. Children this age are very prone to guilt. They will think in some way that they were responsible for the person who died. A child this age getting ready to go to school maybe has an argument with a brother or sister, their parent says something hurtful in the heat of the moment. If that person dies during that day, the child will think it's their fault. Had I not said or done whatever it was I said or did, the person wouldn't have died. Now, we know that's not true, but children this age are very prone to that. They're also prone to shame because now they feel weird. They feel different, and they're ashamed because their family's not the same as everybody else's. Now, we know there's lots of single-parent families around for any number of reasons, but they think, I'm odd now because I used to have a mommy and a daddy, now I only have one because one or the other died. They will begin to worry about their own death. Now, I said at this age, they understand that death is final and death comes to everyone. But that's an intellectual understanding of death. That's out there. When a sibling, a parent, or a grandparent dies, that's death very up close and personal for the child, and they will then begin to worry about their own death. Children this age have difficulty talking about feelings, and their feelings may come out through behaviors such as school avoidance, poor performance in school, aggression, physical symptoms, and withdrawal from friends, and regression. Obviously, a child who experiences a death in their family is going to miss some time from school. But when it's time to go back to school, many children don't want to go back to school because they're experiencing that shame. I'm odd. Everybody else in my learning center, nobody died in their house. I don't want to go back to school because I feel odd. A child who is normally a good student, their performance in school, their academic performance may begin to slip. A child who is normally very docile may be very aggressive on the playground, punch Timmy in the nose because he cut in line for the swing set or whatever. If the death was a physical death from an illness, the child has heard people talk about the physical symptoms that the person who died was experiencing. The child may begin to complain of those same symptoms because they're mimicking what they heard. And something you will see is a child this age who has experienced the loss of a loved one will regress in behaviors. Something like thumb sucking that they've overcome in, but they may, at this time, regress. Because thumb sucking, for example, for many children is a comfort mechanism, and we can easily see why they would want to go back to something that they found comforting. Teenagers, ages 13 to 18. Now, teenagers have an adult understanding of the concept of death, but they do not have the experiences, the coping skills, or the behavior of an adult. Teenagers may act out in anger at family members or show impulsive behaviors such as substance abuse, fighting in school, and sexual promiscuity. Now, quite frankly, it's not terribly likely that a student in your school who has experienced the death of a loved one is going to turn to something like drug abuse or sexual promiscuity, because that's so diametrically opposed to what's normal for them. But we need to realize it's not beyond the realm of possibility, especially if that young person, this teenager, begins hanging out with other young people that they normally would not, other kids in the neighborhood that may be involved in those things. So we need to be aware of the possibility. Teenagers, again, will experience a wide range of emotions, but they don't know how to handle them, and they're not comfortable talking about them. Now, you have to remember that being a teenager is hard enough by itself. I've defined teenager years as the terrible twos times 50 plus hormones. They don't know whether they're animal, vegetable, mineral, or bread box. Hormones are being dumped into their bloodstreams by the gallon. They are experiencing significant emotional and physical changes. That's hard enough by itself. Then you put on top of that the loss of a brother or sister or their mother or their father or one of their grandparents. It really upsets their apple cart. And they don't feel comfortable talking about those things. The reality of death, again, like for a younger child, it's up close and personal. The reality of death that close to them contradicts that teenager's view of himself as invincible and immortal. Many teenagers act as if they're going to live forever. When you're 15 years old, somebody who's 25 is ancient. And video games, however many generations of video games we've had, all the way back to Pac-Man and Atari and all those things, but that has fed that sense of immortality and invincibility, because in a video game you get zapped. Oh, well, you just reset the game and you start over again. If you're really good at the video game, you can stockpile or store extra lives. You get zapped, just pull out one of the extras. Well, because their father died or their brother died, they know that's not real life. So that death contradicts their view of themselves as invincible. And they may begin to question their faith as a result of the death of someone close to them. Now, the need of a teenager to be independent and separate from their parents, again, that's normal. They're stepping back from their parents some distance because they want to establish themselves as an individual. I'm me. I'm not my mom. I'm not my dad. I'm not my brother. I'm me. So that natural tendency to step back from other adults can interfere with that teenager's ability to receive support from other adults, adult family members, or from you on the church or school staff. The coping strategies of a teenager may create tension with family members, as adolescents may cope by, 1, spending more time with friends, or 2, withdrawing from everyone and closeting themselves in their bedroom. Many teenagers, they want to be anywhere but home, because home is abnormal. There's all these people there, the out-of-town family and guests, and people are sad, and people are crying, and people are in the corners talking and whispering. It's abnormal. So they don't want to be there. So they want to go to their friend's house. Their friend's house is normal. Nobody died there. And they will try if they can keep themselves super busy with their friend at their friend's house for a season, they can pretend what happened didn't happen until they have to go back home. So they may want to, that may cause a problem with their parents, because why aren't you here? Everybody else is here. Or they may go to the other extreme, which my great-nephew Cody has done He has closeted himself in his bedroom, doesn't even want to come out to eat, doesn't want to talk to anybody, doesn't want to go to school. So they may do either one or the other. It may fall to you and me as Christian educators to explain death to children. Now, in principle, it is part of our responsibility, generally speaking. To do that, we want to take advantage of teachable moments. In explaining death to children, we don't want it to be, and it should not be, one great big tell-all moment about death, because children can't process that much, even teenagers can't process that much information at once. So we use teachable moments that are natural, and they're not emotion-laden, and they're non-threatening to teach about death and its relation to life. You go on a field trip, and you're at a lake or a pond or a river, and there's a fish that has died and washed up on the bank. Just a couple of sentences, you can explain that God designed a fish's body in such a way that he has this air bladder that keeps him vertical in the water, and he can regulate his depth. And as long as he keeps moving through the water flows over his gills and he can breathe. Something happened to that fish's body that it didn't work that way anymore, and he died. He's on the bank. Or a bird flies into a window, hits it so hard that he dies and lands on the pavement outside your school. Same thing. You can say that the bird hurt himself so badly he couldn't function, his body didn't function anymore. They're not emotional, they're non-threatening. It's a bird, it's a fish. But we can communicate some information. Easter is a wonderful time to explain death to some degree to children, because children need to understand that Jesus really died on the cross. When they put him in the tomb, he hadn't fainted, he wasn't in a coma, he had died. And we have to explain what we mean by died, because if they don't understand what dead means, if I can say it that way, they can't appreciate the miracle of the resurrection. So it would fall to us to a degree to explain death, generally speaking, to children. But if some of that or none of that's been done previously, when they experience a loss, we may have to do a lot of explaining to catch up, so to speak. When we explain death to a child, in any time period, we want to avoid euphemisms and confusing explanations. Explaining death should be done in simple, direct terms with information that is geared to the child's developmental level, using real words like dead and died. Especially if a death has occurred in their family, we tend to shy away from using those words because they sound so harsh. They're so in your face. But if we use terms or euphemisms like sleeping, gone away, lost, or gone on a trip, those are expressions or statements we're going to have to retract later because they're not true. And when we have to retract them because they aren't true, it may damage the child's trust of us. They may think, even if they don't say, why didn't you just tell me the truth in the first place? So it's important to use accurate information that's age appropriate. Children cannot reflect on their thoughts and emotions like adults, so they probably will need to have many short conversations. We as adults may need to repeat the same information many times, and children may ask the same questions often as they try to make sense of difficult information. In explaining death, I just said about the resurrection, we're going to share our basic religious beliefs with children. Remembering that young children especially are very concrete in their thinking. They don't develop the ability to think abstractly till they're 11, 12, 13 years of age in there, somewhere along those lines. So little guys are very concrete thinkers. So they have a hard time understanding something as abstract as a soul or a spirit. I mean, they hear us say it in church all the time, but they have no idea what that means because you can't see or touch a soul or a spirit. So when we're communicating our basic religious beliefs to a child, we need to distinguish between three kinds of information. First kind is what we know as a result of scientific and medical fact. That's pretty cut and dried. I mean, that's scientific medical fact. That's one kind of information. The second kind of information is what the Bible says about death and dying. Medical fact, what the Bible says. That's the second kind. The third kind of information is what we, you and I, what we imagine to be the case concerning death and life after death. We have to distinguish between the three because it is best not to contradict a child's images with our own biblically unsubstantiated images of heaven. There's no point in taking away something that a child finds comforting simply because you and I imagine it a bit differently. If a little girl has lost her grandmother, And in her mind, she sees grandma in heaven. She knew grandma was a Christian. Grandma's in heaven. She has a white robe and angel wings and a halo and a harp, and she's lounging on pink clouds. Hey, I can't go to the Bible and say that's not right. I might think they're blue clouds. But since it's grandma, I guess it will be pink clouds. But I can't say that that's wrong because I imagine it differently. So we need to distinguish between the three kinds of information and don't take something away from a child that they find comforting. We're going to provide basic information. We need to provide basic information about death and its causes. For example, I've already said this a little bit. Tell the child that at death, the body doesn't work anymore, like the fish or the bird. And the person who has died is no longer able to breathe, eat, drink, sleep, talk, laugh, feel, touch, move, or do any of the other things that a person who is living is able to do. If the death was caused by an illness, we need to make sure the child understands that only very serious illnesses, cancer, emphysema, heart failure, cause the person to die. Only very serious illnesses. So when they're told you can't go to school because you have a runny nose or a sore throat, they understand, yes, you're ill, you're sick, but you aren't going to die from a runny nose or a sore throat. In like manner, if the death was caused by an accident, maybe their dad was killed in an accident at work, a work-related accident, or there was a terrible traffic accident. They need to understand that in a bad accident, the body is injured so badly, like the birds, that it doesn't work anymore. But they need to understand again that only very serious accidents cause a person to die. You had an accident. You fell off the sliding board at school, but you're not going to die from 2 skinned up knees and 2 skinned up elbows. It is best for us to avoid the idea that God has taken the person who has died. A child might become angry and disillusioned with the God who would take away her daddy, for example. Why would God take away my daddy? Me and my mommy, we need my daddy. God's got a whole world of people. Why would he take my daddy? I don't have an answer to that question. Do you? So it's best not to go down that road. But reassure them, however, that God is waiting with open arms when a person does die. In like manner, we want to avoid using the idea that whatever happened, in this case the death, is God's will. Again, a child may become confused since they have been taught that God is kind and loving. So why would he do such a thing? Why would it be God's will? Why would God plan? Why would it be his purpose that my baby brother die? Again, I don't have an answer, so it's best not to go down that road. When they have questions, we want to answer the questions truthfully and in words they can understand, because we don't want them to fill in the blanks. Children, as I said, are very concrete thinkers. And when they hear something, little guys, when they hear something that they don't understand, they'll run it through their little computers and make it make sense to them. Silly example, you've probably read these things. We sing the hymn with the line, "Up from the grave he arose," right? We say it fast. Children hear, "Up from the gravy." So here's the resurrection, folks. The child doesn't understand. Here's the resurrection. Pile of mashed potatoes. Jesus coming out of a pile of mashed potatoes. It's got gravy on. They made it make sense. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance. 2 big words. They don't understand what they mean. So what do they hear? Legions of pigeons. Flagpoles and pigeons. They go together, don't they? They didn't understand, so they make it make sense. How does it apply here? If we don't give them accurate information and there's blanks in their understanding, they're going to fill in the blanks. They're going to work it around and make it make sense. But what they come up with on their own to fill in the blanks may be far scarier than if we just told them the truth in the first place. After this workshop a couple stops ago, a lady came up to me and said it had fallen to her. Something that happened during the day, had to tell a little guy that, I don't know what the relation was, but a family member had died. And she was trying to be very sensitive and very gentle. And she's saying all this stuff, and the little boy looks up at her and goes, "You mean he's dead?" Yes, that's what I mean. Sometimes we need to give them factual information. Helping children grieve, that's what we're talking about in this workshop. Children need significant support as they deal with the loss. But we're talking about a child who's lost a sibling, a parent, or a grandparent. So if the child has lost a sibling, that means their parents have lost a child. If the child has lost a parent, that means their surviving parent has lost their spouse. If the child has lost a grandparent, that means one of their parents has lost one of their parents. So the parents may be in no position to give the level of support a grieving child needs because they're dealing with their own grief. And it may fall to you and me in the church and the school to provide that level of support they need, especially initially. I like to have a nickel for every time I've said, in abnormal times do normal things. This is true when there's a death in a family. We need to encourage the family, but we can do it at school too. Keep routines as consistent as possible. Care, consistency, and continuity give children a sense of safety. I said children are obviously going to miss time from school when there's a death in the family, but after a season, one of the best things for the child to do may be to go back to school, because that's normal. Get up, get dressed, go to school, set your goals, work your goals, go to phys ed, go to chapel. Those are all normal. And you want to help the family keep the routine as normal as possible for a child. Well, think about this. I read this in my devotions one day after I was out here on tour, and I'm going, that's exactly what I'm talking about. In John chapter 21, the crucifixion has occurred. Jesus was buried. The resurrection has occurred. He's appeared post-resurrection to his disciples more than once. But the disciples, they're mourning. They're grieving. Their mentor, their friend, has gone. And they don't understand all this stuff. So what does Peter say? I'm going fishing. Because that's normal. I understand fishing, he says. And the other disciples go, all right, we'll go with you. Because that's normal. Now, the rest of that day was not normal, but we won't go there. But that was the motivation. I understand fishing. I'm going fishing. But also, one should realize that we need to set limits on a child's behavior, because that's normal too. When they do come back to school, your heart's breaking for them. They've lost their mother. They've lost their father. But don't let them get away with murder. That's not doing them any benefit. Hey, you didn't do your homework, that's a demerit. You punch Timmy in the nose, you have to deal with the consequences. Because many children, nothing else in their life is normal. So they may come to school and kick the fences, so to speak, to see if school is still normal. If I don't do my goals, am I going to get in trouble? If I hit somebody, am I going to get in trouble? Set limits on their behavior. I know it's hard to do because their heart is breaking for them, but that actually help things be normal for them. And for little guys, they may think that if I go outside at school or after church or at home, I go outside with my friends and I laugh and I giggle and I play and I swing and I hang from the tree and rhyme about all that I'm being disloyal to the person who's died because I've had fun. I'm having fun and I'm laughing. Tell them and help the family to tell them, no, go do that because it's normal. And you could say it this way, if Daddy died, Daddy would want you to do that. Go out and have fun. Play with your friends. Ride your bicycle. Play baseball, whatever it is. Encourage them to do that because it's normal. Recognize that children grieve differently. Adolescents are the most likely to have exaggerated grief experiences. Teens are no longer children, yet neither are they adults. With the exception, I've already said this, but with the exception of infancy, no developmental period is so filled with change as is adolescence. Leaving the security of childhood, the adolescent begins that separation, that process of separation from parents. So, in that circumstance, the death of a parent or a sibling can be particularly devastating for a teenager. And I feel very strongly about this. Well-meaning people, if a teenage boy has lost his dad, well-meaning people may very well say to that boy, you're the man of the house. You got to help your mom. You got to help take care of your brothers and sisters. Or if it's a teenage girl who's lost her mother, you're the woman of the house. You got to help your dad. You got to help him with cleaning and cooking and your little brothers and sisters. That's not fair. Here is a teenager who they're hardly able to breathe. They're living one breath at a time, putting one foot in front of the other, one at a time, just to get through a day. To put that kind of burden on them, I said it's well-meaning people, but put that burden on them, what we're saying to them, what they're hearing is, you don't have a right to grieve. What you have to do is take what you're feeling and put it aside and man up or woman up. Yes, the family routine is obviously going to change if dad or mom has died. And the teenager may assume some other responsibilities that weren't normally theirs. But not now. There's other adults, us, that we can step in and help through that transition process. Do not put that on a teenager because it is patently not fair. We want to help a grieving child, take care of unfinished business. Unfinished business are the what-ifs or the if-onlys. If I had only told him I loved him one more time. What if I hadn't said that I hate you? The child that had an argument in the morning before on their way to school. If I had kissed him when I left today. I usually do, but I didn't today. Those are all what-ifs, if-onlys. Things that a child wishes they had done and they didn't. Wishes they had said and didn't. Wishes they hadn't said and did, as the case may be. That's all unfinished business. And they feel like they're stuck. They feel like they're wedged in the hole now because the person's gone. They can't do anything. But you can help them take care of unfinished business. For little guys, let them draw a picture depicting whatever it is they want to say or do. Maybe several pictures. Put them in an envelope. Get a bunch of helium balloons. Tie the envelope to the helium balloons on the balloons and take them outside and let them go. Children view heaven as up. Well, most of us view heaven as up. So they're sending that message to the person who's died. It goes up. You don't have to tell them, it'll be in Detroit next week. But they're sending it to heaven. That's helping them take care of unfinished business. For an older child who can write, let them write a letter to the person who's died, giving expression to those emotions, those I wish I hadn't things. It may be short, it may be long. They may never let anybody else read it, probably won't. They may write it and then destroy it. That's all okay. But they've given expression to those things they wish they had said or whatever. If they don't want to write, give them an opportunity and space and time to sit in a room and talk to a picture of the person who's died. Again, giving verbal expression to I wish I had, I wish I hadn't. But that's helping them take care of unfinished business so they don't feel wedged, they don't feel stuck. Encourage questions. Questions may come in waves, but they will think about answers already received and come back with even more questions. Note different levels of understanding. Now, you may not be, you probably won't be able to provide all the answers to all the questions, but you can always provide support. Now, I'm going to tell you what I would do. You have to make your own decision. But for me, personally, for a grieving child, a hug is worth 10 million words. Now, I know we have to be discerning and discreet about physical contact with other people's, children, not our own. But if a grieving child wants a hug, I'm going to give them a hug. Now, I'm going to be smart about it. If they're little guys, I'm going to get down on my knees. Today, I might not get back up. But I'm going to get down on my knees so I'm not so tall to them. Or if it's an older child, a teenager, whatever, the side hug or the arm around the shoulder. But for a child, for example, who's lost a parent, the very thing they may need and want is physical contact with an adult who loves them. So you decide, but I'm going to give them a hug. We need to realize that there are no perfect or right things to say or do. Many times when we're trying to help a grieving person, in our case a child, we are afraid we're going to do something wrong, so we don't do anything. There is no book, there is no list where you can look at the list and say, you're supposed to say this, say this, say this, do this, do this, do this, check them all off, you got it right. There's no such list. We have to take the lead from the grieving person. If they want to talk, we'll sit there and listen. If they don't want to talk, we'll just sit there. Whatever it is, but there's no perfect right way to do it. You can't get it right, and you can't get it wrong either. Answer truthfully their questions, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know, because they're going to ask questions that you don't know the answers to. Answer only what is being asked. Make sure you understand what a child is really asking you, and provide only that information. How do you do that? You reflect your question back to them. A child comes to you and says, what's going to happen now that Grandpa has died? Well, you say, what do you think is going to happen? And they may say, well, he's going to go to heaven and be with Grandma. Well, now you know. You know the question that's being asked, and you can respond appropriately. But without reflecting the question back to the child and knowing what they're really asking you, and I'm going to do this humorously, intentionally, but we may go down this road. We don't know what they're really asking us, so we're going to say, okay, they're going to put Grandpa's body in a big box called a coffin or a casket, and then they're going to dig a hole 6 feet deep in the ground. There's going to be this concrete thing in the bottom called a vault, and they're going to put the casket in the vault. They're going to put this real heavy lid on top of that. Then they're going to put about 3 feet of dirt on top of that, and they're going to put this big stone that has Grandpa's name on it, and in a matter of time, Grandpa's body is going to start decomposing. That's a whole lot more information than that child needed or wanted. Now, we probably wouldn't go down that road that far, but we could go down that road if we didn't know what the child was asking. So make sure you know what they're asking and only give them the information they actually need. And then encourage expressions of feelings. Children may feel like they need to mimic what's going on at home. Let a child know, let any grieving person know for that matter, that feelings are valid and need to be accepted and expressed. Feelings are feelings. They're not right, they're not wrong, they're just feelings. And they need to be allowed to express them. And sharing your own feelings with a child, if it was their parent belonged to your church, you're experiencing grief as well. Share with them how you're feeling. It may encourage them to share with you how they are feeling. And encourage participation in the events following the death. Children should be asked, now this is up to the parents really, but they should be asked how much do they want to be involved in. I hate viewings. I still hate viewings. I was a pastor. I was a hospice chaplain. I've been to lots of viewings. I still hate them. But anyway, if the child is going to be taken to a viewing, somebody needs to explain to a child what a viewing is. There's a funeral. Explain to them what's going to happen. They're forearmed with knowledge. If the funeral is going to be in the church, of course, they've been in church plenty of times, but say, the casket is going to be right in front of the pulpit in the front of the church. It may be closed, it may be open. But somebody's going to sing, and somebody's going to read this, and pastor's going to give a message, whatever. But so they know. If it's going to be in a funeral home, take them to the funeral home or somebody. Any funeral director worth their salt will let you bring a child to see. Now, it may not be the same room, but they can at least see the building so that's not a surprise to them. Children don't know where their family has cemetery plots. Somebody take them to the cemetery. The grave may have been opened, it may not yet. But so they can see, so when they go there for a graveside service, if the child goes, they know what's going to happen. Forearm them with information so that they aren't surprised, they aren't scared. And take the lead from the child, their involvement. If they want to sing, let them sing. Maybe they can't carry a tune in the bucket. Who cares? They want to write a poem. They want to draw a picture. They want whatever. If they want to be, now don't force them to be involved, but if they want to be involved, let them. If a child wants to put something in the casket, we don't have to be governed by society's norms. If a little boy's fondest memories are playing catch with his daddy, and he wants to put his baseball glove in the casket, who cares? Who cares? If that's something that will help the child. Then we need to remember that, we want to encourage or help the child commemorate the life of the deceased. We want to help them replace the hurt with happy memories. For any person who's experienced the loss, the next time we go see them, many of us are afraid to say the person who has died's name because we're afraid it's going to hurt. But then what they think is, nobody remembers them anymore. It's like they were never here. So with a child, but any grieving person, hey, their little brother died. Remember when we went on the field trip and we went canoeing and your canoe turned over and your brother fell in the river? Wasn't that funny? That's replacing a hurt with a happy. And we want to do that. Talk about the person who has died. And then remember that any person who is grieving faces an entire year of firsts. First birthday, first Christmas, first Thanksgiving for an adult, first wedding anniversary. Those are difficult days. Don't let them go by unnoticed. Don't be afraid to say, hey, do you know what today is? A happy thing. Some of you may remember Dr. Broadacker. Dr. Broadacker lost his wife on their wedding anniversary. It's been 2 years ago, but the last 2 years, my wife has sent a card, not a wedding anniversary card, but she sent a card to Dr. Broadacker on that anniversary saying, hey, we remember Miss Frankie too. She loved her. Dr. Broadacker had a pond on his farm stocked with catfish. Dr. Broadacker would catch the catfish. Miss Frankie would fry so many catfish she could feed half of Missouri with it. That we would mention something like that for Dr. Broadacker. So remember that you have a whole year of firsts. And then realize that grief never ends, but it does change in character and intensity. As they work through, as they go through the process, they'll eventually get through it. It'll get better. And then use available resources. Your local hospice has bereavement counselors who they'd be willing to come to your school and talk. If it's several children, maybe a staff member died, and they would be willing to come talk to your students in your school. They'll give you information that will be beneficial. Support groups, parents who have lost children, children who have lost parents, a support group may help. Go to your Christian bookstore, information on books on helping children grieve. And then for you pastors, a person's grief may be so deep and so severe that it may be beyond your ability, and that's not a fault, but beyond your ability to help that person. Maybe you need to recommend them to a professional Christian counselor, a professional Christian grief counselor. There's no fault of yours. That's acknowledging that's beyond what you can do. So when grief comes to your school, you can be Christopher Robin and help a child who's wedged in great tightness of their grief and afraid to go back, can't go back, afraid to go forward, but you can make a difference.